And welcome back, everyone. So in this video, Lee, you have written down terrain patch cleanup. So what needs to be cleaned up?
Well, it's more of an aesthetic thing for me as opposed to actual code cleanup. We
Okay.
will be doing some stuff in code, but the problem that I want to fix or clean up, if you will, is what happens when we hit play. So when we play and it starts creating all these meshes, and we'll give it a sec to create, we've got a whole bunch of game objects that get thrown in that are all named mesh, and they're all thrown in at the root level of our hierarchy. This makes it really hard to find stuff inside of here, let alone if you want to try to figure out which mesh is which. So if you're trying to figure out a problem with the spacing, then this will make it difficult. So what I want to do is make these names a little bit more meaningful, as well as grouping these underneath a empty game object.
It's like a master node or something. Okay.
Yeah, pretty much. It's just an organizational trick that I like to do. So if we jump over to Visual Studio again, you can see we have the TerrainPatch in here. What I want to be able to do is run something only the very first time TerrainPatch gets created. So to do this, I'm going to create a public static bool. Well, I could make this a property. I could make it, yeah, let's make it a property. Let's do is initialized. If I make it a public property, then that allows us, if we need to check to see that this has been initialized, we can verify that. So we've got is initialized, and we'll want to create a method to go along with that. The method that I want to create is going to be public. Oh, actually, I don't want to make this one public. Let's make it private. I can type really. So private void. Funny enough, I'm going to call it initialize. And our initialize is going to do some stuff. But at the very end, it's going to set is initialized to be true. So the very first thing that I
Now, do
want
you
to
want
do,
anybody else to be able to?
force the initialize.
Yeah.
There's no real need to, because the only time that really anything in here is going to pertain is only if a terrain patch is created,
Hmm.
and this is going to handle creating the root level for all the patches, and I don't really want that in the object if we don't have a
Well, I
terrain
was just
patch.
wondering with the public setter on the property, but I know it's just R&D, so keep going.
Well, the public setter on the property is so we can verify something, and we're going to jump
Oh,
over
okay. I got you.
over
I'll
to
I'll be
that
quiet.
in a sec.
I'll be quiet.
So what we're going to do is if not is initialized, then we won't want to run the initialize. Now, there's some things that we want to do, because right now we're kind of doing this in a dirty way, which is basically to say, hey, if patches is equal to null, go ahead and create our patch list. We know for a fact, and this is why I don't want to make this public, is I only want this list to ever be initialized one time.
Well, it makes
If I
sense.
were
We
to,
wouldn't want to make it public for lots of reasons, not just that, but
right. So that cleans this part of it up.
okay.
And then we can go in and we're going to hold a couple of more fields in here. So I want to have a private static. And this is going to be a game object. And this will be our terrain object itself. So inside of initialize, we'll want to create that. So train object is going to equal a new object, and we're going to give it the name terrain. This is the name that it will appear inside of the hierarchy when it's created. We're going to position it, so we're going to set its transform.position, and we're going to set that to a vector 3.0. Wow, that was pretty good.
And then,
Come
yeah,
on.
on the next line. Oh, you fighting
Yeah.
with some lag?
Yep.
Gotcha.
All right, so now that we've got it created, and I only want one of these objects, which is why it's up here. Once it's created, I can come down here and take our mesh object and parent it to it. So I can say the mesh object dot transform dot parent is going to be equal to our terrain object transform. So we're parenting it to our terrain object's transform. Now, there's a couple of other things that I want to do to our mesh object. One is I want to take our mesh object and I want to make sure that it is set to a static object. Our mesh object itself, while we will be sculpting on it, is not animated and it's not going to be moving through the scene. It's always going to be in its relative position. So we're just going to set it to static. And then we're going to set its tag to be equal to terrain. And we're going to have to go back into Unity and fix this because we don't currently have a tag called terrain. So we're going to have to add a tag called terrain. I also want to add our mesh object, or our TerrainPatch in this case as it gets created, to a layer. The layer that I want to create is going to be also called terrain. Now terrain is a big enough item that we will probably be doing collision checks against it, and we'll want it to have its own layer. We only get so many layers. The number of layers that we get is limited to 32, I believe. 31 or 32. And of those, 8 of them are reserved. So we only have access to 24 of them that we can assign. So you want to be very, very particular on what layers get created because they're not unlimited like tags are for the most part. So to add a layer, they work a little bit different. We have to use the layer mask, and we call name to layer, and this will look up our terrain based off of our name. In this case, it's string. Convert it to a layer, which or converts it to a layer mask, which is just a bit mask, and assigns that bit mask to our mesh objects layer. So that will finish up what we need to do inside of here.
Now,
we can go back.
are you going to leave the name just mesh, or is that coming up?
What do you mean? Oh, the mesh object? Yeah, we're going to get to that in a little bit.
Oh, okay, okay.
I just want to make sure this part works first, but we need to go into our layers. We can do edit layers, and this allows us to edit layers as well as tags. As you can see, we've got between 0 and 31, so we've got 32 total layers, but 0 through 7 are grayed out. They're called built-in layers. These are reserved for Unity's use. We cannot change these, and we cannot access. Well, we can access them and look for them, but we can't access them in a way that we can change them. We're only allowed to choose or change and assign layer 8 through 31. So these 24 are for our use. So this is why I said you need to be very careful on how you allocate this because it's quite easy to run out of these. So we're going to take user layer 8 and we're going to call this terrain. Then we're going to go into tags and we're going to create a tag called terrain. and go ahead and run this. Make sure everything works. So now we've got our object called terrain. Inside of it, we have all of our meshes. If we click on a mesh, we can see it's marked static.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a tag of terrain and it's got a layer of terrain. And as you pointed out, it's still called mesh. So we have to go and deal with this issue now.
Okay.
So we'll jump back into the code here. After we create our mesh, we're allowed to name it. Well, actually, it's named right here. But so what I want to do is I want to keep the mesh part of it. We've got that. But I want to give it basically an index number, and I want to be able to tell where it is. So I'm going to use mesh and then use 0. And let's do another underscore 1. Use the colon and 2. Alt enter.
Enter.
Yep. Lag got me on that.
Okay.
Another window popped up. All right. So now for the very first parameter that we're going to send in, we're going to look for our patches.count. I'm going to add 1 to it because I want our patches to be numbered 1 through. I don't want them to be 0-based numbering.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to add 1 to it inside a bracket so that calculation gets performed first before we convert it into a string. And then after that, I want to pad left. And I want to pad by 3. And the character I want to use is going to be 0. What this is doing is it's going to say mesh underscore 001, 002, all the way up through our mesh count. Now, 3 should be enough because I've done some experiments with over 100 patches. I believe up to 225 was the most patches I've had visible at a time, which works well depending on the requirements of your machine. But likewise, going over 1,000 patches isn't very likely, so I don't need any more than that number of patches. All right, so I'm going to hit comma. I'm going to wrap down because I'm running out of space on that line. Come on. Tab would be nice. Does my tab not work? Or is this something, one of those settings?
Yeah, it's some setting somewhere. Just roll with it for now. It's for those of you that may not know, this is a completely new install of everything on a new machine, so no surprise. But that's all right. Just keep jamming with it.
All right. Now, for the second value that I want to keep track of is going to be position X, followed by position Z. Or Z. And make sure that all my brackets are working. So we can build this out. Jump back over. Give this a run. And it is faster than your other one.
Yeah, it gets us in there quicker.
Right. So if you look now, we've got mesh, we've got our index number, so I know what order these are in the system, and it gives me my position in meters from the origin of the world. So if we jump over to scene, so right here, this is mesh 1, which is at 0, 0. Mesh 2 is minus 96 at 0, which means minus 96 in X and 0 in Z, so it should be this patch,
And it
which
is.
it is. So, and likewise, this one is 0 in X and minus 96, so that should be this one.
And it is.
So it just gives me an easier representation. So if I'm going, oh, I need to find this patch right here. Well, that one's should be this one right here. Just right. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you
0
went.
and 96.
Yeah, you went in Z as opposed
Mouse.
to X. There you go.
That,
but that's right.
mouse error. The mouse did it, really. All right. But that cleans up our hierarchy. So we've got it all organized. We've got names that, while kind of long, do make sense and give us a representation of what patch is where in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then we can collapse it all down and keep our hierarchy nice and clean.
Okay.
That's what I wanted to cover in this video. We will come back and make more changes later with the TerrainPatch, specifically once we get the config file in place, because there's a lot of numbers that are in here that are going to have to be modified to work with that new system when we put it in place.
Gotcha. All right. Well, with that will conclude this video. Thanks a lot, everyone.